Thank you so much. The thing about this is,
Man, Etta James had a voice that could straight up break your heart and heal it in the same breath. You play at last and boom, you're in another world. Goosebumps on your arms, tears in your eyes. That's how powerful she was, you know? But here's the wild part. For all that soul, all that fire, all that once-in-a-generation talent, Etta James stayed underrated. Like, how does that even make sense, man? She was raw. She was real. She was wild. A woman who lived hard, sang harder, and poured every ounce of pain and joy into her music. Yet somehow, history didn't crown her the queen she deserved to be. So today, we're asking, what really happened to Etta James? How did a legend end up in the shadows, even while giving the world songs that will never die? Let's find out their story now. Etta James wasn't born into comfort, not even close. She came into this world on the 25th of January, 1938, in Los Angeles, California, carrying a story that was messy before she even took her first breath. Her mother, Dorothy Hawkins, was just 14 years old. 14, man. Think about that, barely a teenager, already a mother, trying to figure out life and motherhood at the same time. And Etta's father? Well, that was a mystery that followed her for years. Some said he might have been a famous pool player, even Minnesota Fats, but Etta herself never truly knew for sure. That absence left a hole in her heart that no spotlight could ever fill. Growing up in the 1940s as a black child in America wasn't easy, and for Etta, the struggle was doubled. She didn't have the stability of a two-parent household. Her mama wasn't always around, often chasing her own adventures, her own freedom. That meant little Etta bounced between caretakers. Sometimes she was with relatives, sometimes with foster parents, and sometimes left in situations no child should ever be in. She carried abandonment like a scar on her soul, and you can hear it in her voice later. Every note, every growl, every wail was touched by that early pain. But here's the crazy twist. Out of that chaos came the roots of one of the most powerful voices ever. By the age of 5, she was already singing in the church. We're talking about Street Paul Baptist Church in South Central LA. And this wasn't just Sunday morning humming. This was the real deal. The kind of gospel training that put fire in a young girl's lungs. Etta's voice was so strong, so commanding, that people couldn't believe it was coming from a child. Imagine this tiny girl, barely tall enough to see over the pew, shaking the room with notes that sounded like they came from someone who'd lived 1,000 lives. Her talent was so undeniable that the church actually gave her formal vocal training. That's wild, man. Most kids are just learning their ABCs at that age. But Etta was being drilled in breathing, projection, tone things seasoned singers don't even master. And you know what? She ate it up. Music wasn't just a hobby for her. It was survival. When you grow up feeling abandoned, every song you sing is like a lifeline, proof that you're still here, still fighting. Still, life wasn't sweet. By the time she was around 6, Etta's world got flipped again. Her mother moved her across the country to the Fillmore district in San Francisco. A neighborhood alive with music, but also with struggle. Imagine a little girl being shuffled around, never quite knowing where home was. That kind of instability messes with your head, makes you tough, but also hungry for love, for attention, for something steady. And man, Etta would spend her whole life chasing that steady feeling she never got as a kid. In San Francisco, though, something magical happened. Etta started soaking up the city's rich culture of jazz, blues, and gospel. Music was in the air, blasting from bars, record shops, street corners. She'd hear Billie Holiday's aching tones, Louis Armstrong's trumpet, the raw voices of gospel singers, and all of that got baked into her soul. By her early teens, she wasn't just a church singer anymore. She had that edge, that grit, that hunger in her voice. It was gospel mixed with blues, innocence mixed with pain. You could already tell this wasn't some ordinary singer in the making, this was a star in the rough. But remember, she was still just a kid, dealing with the kind of adult pain no child should have to face. Her mama's absence kept cutting her deep. Etta once said she felt like she was always chasing her mother, trying to earn her love. And that hurt, it never really left. It fueled her insecurities, her anger, her rebellion. She grew up fast, way too fast, and that's part of why she later became known as a wild girl. She didn't get the childhood most kids have, so she dove headfirst into a world of grown-up choices before she was ready. And yet, Through all that turbulence, her gift kept shining. By the time she was 12, Etta was leading her own doo-wop group with some girlfriends. They called themselves the Creolettes, and this was her first taste of performing outside the church. Imagine it, a scrappy trio of teens harmonizing on street corners, dreaming of records and radio plays, while Etta's voice towered above it all. She had that natural leader vibe, fiery, magnetic, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just talent, it was destiny. Etta's childhood was rough, no doubt, but every twist and turn shaped the powerhouse she became. The absence of her father gave her that searching, aching quality in her songs. Her mama's inconsistency left her yearning for love, which she poured into every lyric. The church gave her discipline and strength, while the streets of San Francisco gave her swagger and edge. By the time she was a teenager, she wasn't just a girl who could sing, she was a girl who could feel every note like it was life or death. Looking back, you can almost see it as fate. Like, who else could have survived that chaos and turned it into art the way she did? Who else could take pain and make it sound so beautiful, so unforgettable? That was Etta James in the making, raw, restless, and ready to turn the music world upside down. Her early life was no fairy tale. It was abandonment, instability, poverty, and a whole lot of heartache. But it was also the furnace that forged one of the greatest voices of all time. When you hear her sing later on, you're not just hearing notes, you're hearing the little girl who sang through her tears in a church pew, the teenager who hustled on San Francisco streets, the daughter who longed for love she rarely got. That's what made her voice so real, so human, so soul-shaking. And man, little did the world know, that little girl named James Etta Hawkins was about to become Etta James, the woman who would deliver one of the most iconic songs ever recorded. But before she hit that mic, before she stepped into the spotlight, her early scars were already writing the soundtrack of her life. By the time Etta hit her teenage years, she was already living like she had something to prove. And honestly, she did. She wasn't just some girl with a big voice, she was a survivor with a fire inside. Around the age of 14, she and her two girlfriends formed a little group called the Creolettes. Now, picture it. 3 teenage girls in the early 50 seconds, harmonizing on street corners, singing their hearts out at talent shows, hoping somebody important might just hear them. And man, somebody did. That somebody was Johnny Otis, the band leader and talent scout who seemed to have radar for raw talent. He heard the Creolettes perform, and right away he knew Etta was the star. Johnny basically took them under his wing, gave them a shot at recording, and even helped rebrand them. And that's when James Etta Hawkins got flipped into the name the world would come to know, Etta James. Simple, slick, unforgettable. Their first big break came in 1955 when they recorded a little track called The Wallflower, Roll With Me, Henry. Now, this wasn't just any song, it was a bold, playful answer to Hank Ballard's hit, Work With Me, Annie. The Creolettes became Etta James and the Peaches, and suddenly their voices were blasting out of radios across the country. The Wallflower hit #1 on the R&B charts, and boom, Etta was in the game. Think about that. Just a teenager, already with a chart, topping hit. That's crazy, man. But let's be real, success back then wasn't smooth sailing, especially for a young black woman in the music industry. Even with that hit, Etta wasn't showered in fame and fortune. The record industry was notorious for shady contracts, stolen royalties, and broken promises. She was getting attention, yeah, but not the kind that guaranteed stability or respect. Still, she kept grinding. Etta's voice was like nothing else out there. Most singers sounded polished or sweet, she sounded real. Her tone had grit, power, and this deep ache, like she was carrying the weight of the world but still daring you to dance with her. That mix of gospel fire, bluesy growl, and teenage energy made her stand out from day one. Fans loved it. Musicians respected it. But the industry? Man, they didn't quite know what to do with her yet. In those early days, she was touring, performing with big names, and learning how rough the road really was. Long nights, little money, shady promoters. It wasn't glamorous. But Etta didn't back down. She was hungry, and she had the kind of voice you couldn't ignore forever. Every stage, every mic, every song was her chance to prove she wasn't just some one-hit wonder. So, while the Wallflower cracked open the door, Etta was already pushing for more. She wasn't content being just a teen star or a novelty act. She was ready to carve out a career that would shake the soul of American music. And man, that was only the beginning. After that first taste of success with The Wallflower, Etta wasn't slowing down, man. She was still just a teenager, but she already had her eyes set on something bigger. Around this time, she caught the attention of the legendary Chess Records in Chicago. Now, if you know your music history, you know Chess was the place where blues, R&B, and early rock and roll lived. That label had names like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Chuck Berry Giants. And here comes this fiery young girl from California, ready to hold her own with the best of them. When Etta signed with Chess in 1960, it changed everything. This was her chance to step out from the novelty of teenage hits and prove she was an artist with staying power. The folks at Chess saw something in her voice, something raw, versatile, and way bigger than the R&B charts. They weren't wrong. Her debut album for Chess, At Last, dropped in 1960, and it was like the world finally got to hear what she was truly capable of. The title track, At Last, would go on to become her signature song, the one everyone knows, the one couples have played at their weddings for decades. But man, even beyond that one track, the album was stacked. Songs like All I Could Do Was Cry and Trust in Me showed off the emotional depth in her voice. She could sound tender one moment and absolutely tear the roof off the next. But here's the thing, while the music was fire, the recognition wasn't always equal. The industry still had her boxed in, still didn't give her the shine she deserved. She wasn't being pushed like some of the male acts on the label. And compared to stars like Aretha Franklin, who came up shortly after, Etta wasn't crowned the queen of anything. She was just grinding, making hits, and keeping it moving. Her stage presence, though, unmatched. Etta wasn't the type to stand still behind a mic. She commanded the stage raw, unpredictable, electric. Crowds never forgot her once they saw her live. She'd take you to church, the juke joint, and the bedroom all in the same set. That versatility made her untouchable. By the early 60 seconds, Etta James was carving her name into the foundation of American soul music. She had the records, she had the voice, she had the attitude. But the industry? Still half sleeping on her. That's the underrated story, man. She was out here breaking barriers, blending gospel, blues, and R&B into something brand new. But too often she was treated like a side note instead of the headline. Still, Etta kept pushing. Every record, every performance, she was laying bricks for the legacy she didn't even know she was building yet. And soon enough, she was about to hit the heights that would define her forever. By 1960, the world had already heard that Etta James was something special. But when she recorded At Last, everything changed. That song wasn't just a hit, it was an anthem, a moment, a timeless declaration of love that went way beyond the charts. Man, if you've ever been to a wedding, you know the song. The strings swell, her voice slides in smooth as silk but with that rasp of pain, and suddenly everybody's eyes get misty. That's Etta. She could make joy sound like it had been fought for, and heartbreak sound almost beautiful. At Last wasn't just another track, it was the song that showed the full power of her artistry. And the wild part? Etta was barely in her 20s when she recorded it. You listen to that voice and it feels like someone who had lived 100 lives, loved and lost more than once, carried the weight of the world in her chest. That's what set her apart. The At Last album dropped the same year, and it was stacked front to back with gems. Songs like All I Could Do Was Cry hit like a gut punch, real, raw, vulnerable. You could feel the pain in every word, like she was crying through the mic. Then she'd flip it with Trust in Me, smooth and intimate, the kind of track that made you lean closer to the speakers. Etta wasn't locked into one vibe, she was showing the world she could do it all. And let's not forget, this was an era where the lines between genres were still rigid. You had gospel on Sundays, blues in the juke joints, R&B on the radio, and pop for the mainstream. Etta came through and blurred all those lines. She could belt a gospel-flavored wail, then slide into a bluesy moan, then turn around and sound like she belonged in a Broadway show. That's versatility, man. That's artistry. Critics started to notice, and audiences definitely noticed. But here's where the underrated story creeps in. While Etta was racking up R&B chart success, she didn't always get the crossover pop love that artists like Diana Ross or even her label mate Chuck Berry were getting. She had the voice, the songs, the charisma, But the industry wasn't pushing her into that spotlight in the same way. Was it because she was too raw, too unpredictable, too real? That's the question, man. Still, Etta kept climbing. Through the early 60 seconds, she released hit after hit. Tracks like Something's Got a Hold on Me in 1960 showed her gospel roots exploding into a secular song. That track later got sampled by everyone from Avicii to Flo Rida to Christina Aguilera covering it live. It's wild how her fingerprints are still on music decades later. But back then, it was another sign that Etta wasn't just an R&B singer, she was shaping the sound of modern soul. On stage, she became legendary. Audiences never forgot an Etta James show. She didn't just sing, she attacked the mic, poured sweat, dropped to her knees, let it all out. She was giving you gospel intensity, blues, sensuality, and pure rock and roll energy rolled into one performance. You couldn't put her in a box, and that's exactly why fans loved her. By the mid-60 seconds, Etta James had established herself as one of the most powerful female voices in America. She had the catalog, she had the hits, and she had the respect of musicians across genres. Yet even in her breakthrough, you can see the shadow of injustice because for all her talent, for all her groundbreaking artistry, she wasn't always celebrated in the same way as some of her peers. The crown that should have been on her head was given to others, and that's the underrated story we're here to tell. But make no mistake, Etta James was in her prime, and she was just getting started. So here's the thing, while At Last made her immortal, Etta James wasn't stopping at one signature song. The 1960 had her grinding, experimenting, and showing off just how wide her range really was. One year she'd hit you with a torch ballad that broke your heart. The next she'd come through with a raw blues cut that sounded like it came from the Mississippi Delta. That's why folks called her a chameleon. She could adapt to anything and still sound like herself. In 1963, she dropped Something's Got a Hold on Me. Man, that joint was electric. You can hear the gospel church roots in every shout, every clap. It wasn't just a song. It was an experience. That track alone would ripple through music history, sampled and covered decades later. Think about it. In 2011, Avicii flipped it into Levels. Then Flo Rida turned it into Good Feeling. All those hits from the 2010 seconds, they trace back to Etta standing in a studio in the early 60 seconds, pouring her soul into a mic. Wild, right? And then came Tell Mama in 1967. Now we're talking one of her most iconic, fiery songs. That cut was pure Southern soul, gritty, passionate, and straight-up undeniable. It was recorded at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, where legends like Aretha Franklin and Wilson Pickett also laid down tracks. Tell Mama gave Etta her highest charting single since The Wallflower. And it proved she wasn't just a ballad singer, she could bring the heat on up-tempo soul burners too. When you hear that track, you feel the confidence, the attitude. She wasn't asking for respect anymore, she was demanding it. But here's the frustrating part. Even with all these hits, Etta James still wasn't marketed or celebrated like her peers. Aretha Franklin was crowned the Queen of Soul. Diana Ross and the Supremes were polished into crossover darlings. Meanwhile, Etta was out here bearing her soul, influencing everybody, but often left out of the bigger conversation. Why? Some say it was her unpredictable personality. Some say it was the industry not knowing how to package someone so raw and unapologetic. Either way, history didn't give her flowers in real time the way it should have. Still, the artists knew. Musicians from rock, blues, R&B, they all respected her. Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones was a huge fan, even calling her one of the greatest singers he'd ever heard. Her influence was undeniable, even if the mainstream spotlight wasn't always there. By the late 60 seconds, Etta's reputation as a powerhouse was locked in. She'd proven she could dominate ballads, blues, gospel, and soul. She wasn't just versatile, she was versatile with conviction. Every time she opened her mouth, you believed her. That's the mark of a true artist. But with every high came shadows. Behind the curtain, Etta was battling personal struggles that would eventually spill into her career. Even as she was breaking barriers and shaping the sound of soul, demons were waiting in the wing. And that's the tragedy of so many underrated legends. They give everything on stage, and off stage they're left to wrestle with pain alone. So yeah, the 1960 were her breakthrough years hit records, legendary performances, influence on generations to come. But the crown never sat fully on her head. Etta James had the power, the talent, the catalog, but the recognition. It always seemed to slip just out of reach. And man, that's where the story turns. Because after all that glory, all that momentum, life was about to throw her into battles tougher than any stage she'd ever conquered. For every standing ovation Etta James got on stage, there was a storm waiting when the lights went down. That's the heartbreaking part of her story. Man, her voice was unstoppable, but her demons were just as loud. By the mid-1960s, right when her career was heating up, Etta fell into the grip of heroin addiction. And listen, this wasn't just a casual habit. This was deep, dangerous, and it took over her life. Imagine being at the top of your game, critics praising you, fans loving you, and at the same time, you're spending nights chasing a fix, mornings waking up sick, and days trying to hide it all behind a smile. That's wild, man. That's pain you can't fake. Her addiction started messing with everything: her career, her relationships, her finances. She missed shows, showed up late to gigs, and sometimes didn't show at all. Promoters stopped trusting her, record execs got frustrated, and slowly, opportunities started slipping away. This is how the industry works. One mistake, they write you off. And for a black woman in the 60 seconds and 70 seconds, forget about second chances. Etta was talented enough to blow the roof off, but her struggles became ammunition for people who already doubted her. And then came the law. She was arrested multiple times for possession of heroin, and even for writing bad checks to keep her habit going. At one point in the early 70 seconds, Etta was sentenced to a rehabilitation program in a psychiatric hospital, forced to kick the habit under supervision. Imagine a star like Etta James, once dressed in glamorous gowns, commanding stages around the world, now sitting in a clinic, stripped down to her most vulnerable self, trying to fight a chemical demon that wouldn't let her go. That image alone tells you how brutal the fall was. But here's the thing, Etta wasn't just battling drugs, she was battling herself. Remember that little girl abandoned by her father and chasing her mother's love? Those wounds never healed. Every needle, every high was her trying to quiet that pain. And man, you can hear it in her later music. The rasp got raspier, the growl got deeper, the emotion got heavier. Her struggles almost became part of her sound. That's why people believed her, because she was living every lyric. Her relationships didn't escape the chaos either. She had love affairs, heartbreaks, and betrayals that fueled her insecurities. And with the lifestyle came toxic people users, hangers-on, folks who took advantage of her vulnerability. It's one of those cruel ironies. The more talented you are, the more people try to drain you. Financially, it was a roller coaster. She earned big money from hits like Tell Mama and At Last. But addiction and shady business practices meant she rarely saw the kind of wealth her talent deserved. How many times have we heard this, man? A legend making pennies while the industry cashes in. That's the tragic pattern, and Etta was caught right in it. Yet even in the middle of the madness, she couldn't stay away from the music. She'd disappear, clean up for a while, then come roaring back to the stage with that same fire. Fans would forgive her every time, because when Etta sang, it felt like redemption. It felt like she was confessing to the crowd, bleeding out her soul so they could feel less alone in their own struggles. But make no mistake, the late 60 seconds and early 70 seconds were brutal years for her. Addiction had its claws deep in her. The law kept knocking on her door, and the industry wasn't doing her any favors. She was fighting for survival, not just as an artist, but as a human being. And man, as dark as this chapter was, the storm wasn't over, because the years ahead would test her body and spirit in ways even she couldn't sing her way out of. As the 70 seconds rolled into the 80 seconds, Etta James was still swinging between comeback and collapse. That's the underrated story, man. Every time she pulled herself up, life threw another punch. Heroin was the main demon, but it wasn't the only one. Etta also wrestled with prescription drugs, alcohol, and food addiction. She once admitted that her struggles weren't just about drugs, they were about filling the emptiness inside. When she wasn't chasing a fix, she was eating compulsively, sometimes ballooning in weight, then crashing back down again. She went through cycles of rehab, relapse, and redemption, over and over. That fight? It lasted decades. And then there were the health problems. Years of hard living caught up. By the 1990s, Etta was dealing with diabetes. In the 2000s, things got even worse. Morbid obesity forced her into gastric bypass surgery. Later, she developed Alzheimer's disease and leukemia. Think about it, this powerhouse of a woman who once shook arenas was slowly being broken down by her own body. It's heartbreaking, man. But let's not forget the injustice side. The music industry? It never truly had her back. By the time she got clean enough to perform regularly again, the spotlight had shifted to younger stars. The industry that once made money off her pain now acted like she was an afterthought. She'd play shows, tear the roof off, and still barely get press coverage. Meanwhile, less powerful singers were getting called the greatest. That's the bitter truth. There were also personal blows. Her relationship with her mother was always complicated. Dorothy Hawkins passed away in 2002, and Etta carried all that unresolved hurt with her. Even as an adult, she longed for the love and stability she never got as a child. That wound never closed. And her marriages and romances? They were rocky too, filled with passion, but also fights, betrayals, and mistrust. Love was never simple for her. Financial struggles haunted her as well. Despite decades of hits, she wasn't living like a millionaire. There were legal disputes over royalties, managers accused of ripping her off, and family drama over her estate. In her later years, even her own sons were caught in legal battles about who had control over her health decisions and finances. Imagine fighting cancer and Alzheimer's, while the people closest to you are in court over money. That's the kind of chaos Etta faced until the very end. Yet here's the wild thing. She kept performing. Even when her health was crumbling, even when she had to lean on the mic stand for support, Etta James would still walk out on stage and give people chills. She'd growl out, "I'd rather go blind," or "At last," and audiences would rise to their feet in tears. She was hurting, man, but she still gave. That's courage. That's soul. By the 2000s, Etta was in and out of hospitals, fighting leukemia and the effects of Alzheimer's. In her final years, she was frail, sometimes barely able to remember names. And yet, the music lived inside her. Every time her records played on the radio, it was proof that she hadn't been silenced. She passed away on the 20th of January, 2012, just 5 days before her 74th birthday. The world mourned, but here's the underrated part again. Her death didn't get the same media storm as some other legends. Whitney Houston passed just weeks later, and Etta's goodbye got overshadowed. Even in death, she wasn't given her full due. That's tragic, man. Her conflicts, her battles, they were brutal. Addiction, health, family, industry betrayal. But through it all, she never stopped singing. And maybe that's the lesson. Etta James wasn't perfect, but she was real. And in being real, she gave us something more powerful than perfection. She gave us truth. When you talk about Etta James, you're not just talking about a singer, you're talking about a force of nature that left fingerprints all over music. Her life was messy, complicated, full of highs and lows, but the legacy she left behind? Man, it's undeniable. First off, let's start with the obvious. At Last. That one song alone has given Etta James immortality. Released in 1960, it's been played at weddings, in films, in commercials, you name it. From Rain Man to American Pie, to President Obama and Michelle Obama's first dance at the 2009 inaugural ball, At Last, keeps popping up in moments that matter. Think about that decades after she first recorded it. Her voice was still the soundtrack to people's most important memories. That's more than a hit record. That's cultural DNA. But it wasn't just At Last. Etta gave us I'd Rather Go Blind, Tell Mama, Something's Got a Hold on Me, and countless others. Each of those tracks became staples for different genres. Tell Mama became an anthem of strength and defiance, covered by everyone from Janis Joplin to Clarence Carter. I'd Rather Go Blind became the heartbreak blueprint, a song so raw that even Beyoncé, when she portrayed Etta in Cadillac Records, said she had to dig deeper than ever to even attempt it. That's respect, man. Her impact cut across genres. Blues, gospel, soul, R&B, rock. Etta didn't just dip into each lane, she blended them into something new. You can hear her influence in Aretha Franklin's fiery power, Tina Turner's grit, Adele's emotion, Beyoncé's stage presence, Christina Aguilera's vocal runs. When these singers bend their voices, growl in the middle of a note, or throw their whole chest into a ballad, that's Etta's blueprint shining through. And let's not forget the rock world. Bands like the Rolling Stones adored her. Keith Richards once said she had the voice of 1,000 lifetimes. That respect from rock icons shows just how wide her influence stretched. She wasn't boxed in by one community, everybody recognized the truth in her voice. Over the years, the honors started coming in, though sometimes late. She was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993, the Blues Hall of Fame in 2001, and the Grammy Hall of Fame multiple times. She earned 6 Grammy Awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2003. That's beautiful. But man, let's be real, she should have been showered with that recognition way earlier. Still, it showed that the world couldn't deny her forever. Even hip-hop owes her a nod. Remember when Flo Rida's Good Feeling blew up? Or when Avicii's Levels dominated clubs worldwide? Both sampled Etta's Something's Got a Hold on Me. Think about that. A song recorded in 1960, was tearing up dance floors in 2011. That's what I mean when I say she's timeless. Generations who didn't even know her name were still vibing to her sound. That's legacy. Her influence wasn't just about the music, though it was about the raw honesty she brought. Etta James didn't sugarcoat life. She sang about pain, desire, loss, redemption, and she didn't hide the scars. That authenticity has become a model for artists who refuse to play it safe. In an industry full of polished images, Etta stood out because she was real. She was messy, flawed, complicated, and people connected to that humanity. Now, let's talk about representation. Etta broke barriers for Black women in music. At a time when record labels wanted polished, polite stars, she came in loud, wild, and unapologetic. She showed that a Black woman could be powerful, sensual, vulnerable, and bold all at once. That opened doors for others to follow without feeling they had to fit a mold. And man, her story has been retold in different ways. When Beyoncé played her in Cadillac Records, 2008, it introduced a whole new generation to her catalog. Some folks didn't even realize they'd been hearing her songs sampled or in movies for years. That film gave them a face, a name, and a story to connect with the voice they already knew. Even after her passing in 2012, her music hasn't slowed down. Every year, new listeners discover her on streaming platforms, DJs sample her voice, and fans old and new keep her spirit alive. Couples still dance to At Last. Singers still try to match her fire on I'd Rather Go Blind. And every time, people say the same thing. Man, nobody does it like Etta. End of quote. But here's the bittersweet part. Despite all this, she's still often underrated. Her name doesn't always get mentioned in the same breath as Aretha Franklin, Diana Ross, or Whitney Houston. And that's wild, because without Etta James, there might not be an Aretha or a Tina or a Beyoncé in the way we know them. That's why telling her story matters. She deserves to be placed right up there with the greatest of all time. In the end, Etta James left us more than music. She left us courage, the courage to live out loud, to put your soul in every note, to fight even when you're falling. Her life was messy, but her art was magic. And that's the legacy. A voice that refuses to die, an influence that still shapes music, and a story that proves greatness doesn't need perfection. Etta James may have been underrated, but she'll never be forgotten. So let's circle back, man. We started with that voice, the one that could stop you dead in your tracks, the one that could make a stranger cry, the one that gave the world At Last. Etta James had the kind of talent you can't teach, the kind you don't even try to explain, you just feel it. And yet, for all her gifts, for all the songs that still live with us today, she was too often pushed to the side, labeled, overlooked, underrated. That's the tragedy and the beauty of her story. Tragedy, because she should have been celebrated in her lifetime the way Aretha Franklin was, the way Diana Ross was, the way Whitney Houston later would be. Beauty, because even without the crown, Etta still touched millions. Every wedding, every heartbreak, every late-night drive where her voice came on the radio, she was there. She's still there. Etta's life was messy, no doubt. She wrestled with demons, heroin, alcohol, health struggles, family battles, and sometimes those demons won. But when she stepped to the mic, she won every single time. That's the wild contradiction of Etta James, broken in so many ways, but unbreakable when the music started. And here's the real question, man. How does someone like that not get remembered as one of the absolute greatest? How do we put Aretha on the throne, call Whitney the voice, and still leave Etta fighting for her flowers? Shouldn't she be standing right beside them in the pantheon of queens? That's what makes her story sting. But maybe that's also what makes her legacy so powerful. Because even without the full spotlight, she kept shining. She influenced generations who didn't even know her name. She sang truth in an industry that preferred polish. She lived loud, flawed, real, and that's exactly why her songs still cut deep today. When Etta James left this world in 2012, she didn't just leave behind records. She left behind a blueprint for honesty in music. She showed us that you don't have to be perfect to be legendary. You don't have to hide your scars to be remembered. In fact, sometimes it's the scars that make you unforgettable. So yeah, man, maybe the history books didn't always do right by her. Maybe the awards came too late, but none of that erases the truth. And the truth is, Etta James was one of the baddest, boldest, most soul-shaking voices to ever grace this planet. Underrated? For sure. Forgotten? Never. Her name deserves to be said with the same reverence as Aretha, as Billie, as Ella, as Whitney. Because when you press play on At Last, when you close your eyes and let her voice wash over you, you know you're listening to greatness. Period. Etta James, the woman who gave the world her soul, even when the world didn't always give love back. And man, that's a legacy that will never fade.